The day they threw me out, I had exactly $47 in my bank account. The day I bought their company, let's just say the wire transfer had a few more zeros. But here's what really happened in those 18 months that nobody talks about. I still remember exactly how Uncle Richard's voice sounded when he read that letter. Cold, like he was announcing the weather instead of destroying my entire life. The board has determined that your employment with Morrison Family Enterprises is terminated effective immediately. That's all he said. No explanation, no warning, just corporate speak that might as well have been a death sentence. Mom couldn't even look at me. She just sat there at the dining room table, staring at her hands like they held the secrets of the universe. 26 years I'd been her son, and suddenly I was invisible. Dad? Well, that was the real kicker. The man who used to argue about everything from football teams to the weather just nodded along like a broken puppet. Not one word in my defense. The worst part wasn't even the humiliation of sitting there while they carved me out of the family business like a tumor. It was watching my own parents act like strangers. These were the same people who'd preached about loyalty and family values my entire childhood. Blood is thicker than water, they used to say. Apparently, blood gets pretty thin when Uncle Richard starts talking about quarterly projections and market stability. I kept waiting for someone to crack a smile, to tell me this was some twisted joke. Maybe Dad would slam his fist on the table and remind everyone that I'd been working weekends at the warehouse since I was 14. Or Mom would mention how I'd graduated with honors from state, how I'd turned down 3 job offers from competitors just to stay loyal to the family business. But they just sat there like mannequins while Uncle Richard shuffled his papers and cleared his throat. Your key card will be deactivated by 6 p.m., he continued, checking his gold watch like he had somewhere important to be. Security will escort you to collect your personal items. Security at my own family's company. The place where I'd spent every summer vacation, every holiday break, learning the business from the ground up. Then there's the beautiful irony of what happened next. My phone buzzed right there at the table. An email from HR, our HR department that I'd helped modernize just 6 months earlier. Please return all company property, including laptop, phone, and access cards by 5 p.m. today. Failure to comply may result in legal action. Legal action. From my own family. I wanted to laugh, but nothing felt funny anymore. These people had watched me crawl around that warehouse floor as a kid, pretending to be a forklift. They'd seen me work double shifts during college breaks, never complaining, never asking for special treatment because of my last name. I'd earned every promotion, every responsibility they'd given me. At least I thought I had. Uncle Richard folded the letter and slipped it into his briefcase like he was filing away a grocery receipt. This decision wasn't made lightly, he said. And I swear he almost sounded bored. But the company needs stable leadership moving forward. Stable leadership, right, because nothing says stability like kicking out the person who'd been fixing their inventory disasters and streamlining their vendor relationships for the past 3 years. But I guess when you're 58 and worried about your own position, throwing your nephew under the bus starts to look like a smart career move. Mom finally spoke up, but only to ask if anyone wanted more coffee. Coffee, her son was getting exiled from the family business, and she was worried about beverage service. I stood up from that table knowing everything had changed forever. The company that was supposed to be my future, my inheritance, my life's work, gone in 10 minutes of corporate theater. Walking out of that house felt like leaving my own funeral. Except I was still breathing, still had bills to pay, still had to figure out what the hell came next. The drive home was surreal. I kept reaching for my company phone to check messages before remembering it would be dead weight in a few hours. My apartment suddenly felt different too, knowing I'd be paying rent with whatever savings I had instead of that steady Morrison Family Enterprises paycheck. By 5:30, I was standing in my living room holding my old name badge. David Morrison, Operations Manager. I'd been so proud of that title, even though half the family treated operations like glorified janitorial work. Now it was just a piece of plastic with my photo looking back at me like evidence of better times. But here's what they didn't know as they sat there congratulating themselves on their brilliant business decision. Cutting me loose wasn't the end of my story with Morrison Family Enterprises. It was just the beginning of a very different kind of education. The first thing you do when someone kicks you out, you figure out what they're hiding. Makes sense, right? I spent 3 days feeling sorry for myself, then I got mad. Really mad. The kind of mad that makes you dangerous because you stop caring about playing nice. I started with the basics. public records, SEC filings, anything I could dig up online about our company structure. What I found made my stomach drop. We had no formal succession plan on file anywhere. None. Zero. For a business that's been in our family for 43 years, there was literally nothing written down about who takes over when dad retires or dies. That's not just sloppy. That's insane. But here's the weird part. Uncle Mark had been telling everyone for months that everything was handled and documented properly. Turns out he was full of it. Either he was lying through his teeth, or he genuinely didn't know what the hell he was talking about. Both options scared me. Then I dove into the board meeting minutes from the past year. Had to call in a favor from Jenny in corporate filing. She'd always liked me better than my cousin anyway. What I read made my blood boil. Concerns about next generation readiness. That phrase showed up in 4 different meetings. They'd been planning this for months, talking about me like I was some liability they needed to cut loose. The minutes from June were the worst. Uncle Mark had presented what he called leadership assessment findings. Apparently, I was too impulsive for strategic decision-making and showed insufficient respect for established protocols. Translation: I asked too many questions and didn't kiss enough ass. Well, guilty as charged, I guess. Let's not forget the best part. They'd hired an outside consultant to evaluate family member performance metrics. A consultant they paid some stranger to analyze whether I deserved to work in my own family's company. The consultant's report wasn't in the files I could access, but I bet it said exactly what Uncle Mark wanted it to say. I kept digging, and that's when I found the really juicy stuff. Our bank covenants required stable leadership structure to be established by December 31st. We were already in October. If the bank decided our management was too unstable or risky, they could call in our credit line early. That would basically kill the company overnight. Now things started making sense. They didn't cut me out because I was incompetent. They cut me out because the bank was nervous about succession planning. Uncle Mark probably figured it was easier to eliminate the problem than actually create a real transition plan. Typical Mark move. Really. Why solve the root issue when you can just bulldoze through it? But the deeper I dug, the more confused I got about actual power structure. Dad was still listed as CEO and majority shareholder, but Uncle Mark had been signing contracts and making hiring decisions for months. Mom held 15% of voting shares, but never attended board meetings anymore. My cousin Danny somehow had Director of Strategic Initiatives as his title, which sounded impressive until you realized nobody knew what he actually did all day. The ownership structure was a complete mess. Voting rights were split between 5 different family trusts, some dating back to Grandpa's era. Half the documentation referenced corporate bylaws that had been amended so many times, I couldn't tell which version was current. It was like trying to solve a puzzle where someone kept changing the picture. I made a chart mapping who really held power versus who had fancy titles. The results were eye-opening. Uncle Mark controlled way more than his official 25% share suggested, mostly through proxy agreements with other family members who'd basically given up their voting rights. Dad still had the biggest single block of shares, but he'd been letting Mark make most decisions for 2 years. That's when it hit me. Nobody actually knew how this company was supposed to work anymore. We'd been coasting on momentum and family tradition, but the real structure underneath was completely broken. No wonder the bank was nervous. No wonder they wanted stable leadership. What we had wasn't leadership at all. It was just a bunch of relatives stumbling around pretending they knew what they were doing. The funniest part, while I was getting kicked out for being unprepared, the people who stayed were running a company with no clear chain of command, no succession plan, and no idea who was actually in charge of what. But somehow I was the problem. I closed my laptop that night knowing one thing for sure: they hadn't just cut me loose because I wasn't ready. They'd cut me loose because I might have actually fixed things, and fixing things would have meant admitting how broken everything really was. That's when I decided to build something they couldn't break. You know what nobody tells you about getting kicked out of a family business? The silence hits harder than the anger. At least when people are yelling, you know they still care enough to waste energy on you. But this was different. My phone stopped buzzing with work calls, family group chats went quiet, and suddenly I'm just another guy walking around the city with nowhere important to be. The rent on my apartment wasn't going to pay itself, though. Makes sense, right? So I did what any rational person would do when their trust fund gets yanked. I found the most humbling job I could stomach. Night shift at a packaging warehouse across town. $10 an hour plus overtime if I could handle loading trucks until my back screamed. Well, turns out I could handle it better than I thought. Something about physical work cleared my head in ways those boardroom meetings never did. Plus, Working nights meant I had my days free to do something that probably would have horrified my family. I went back to school. Online, sure, but still school. I enrolled in an operations certification program, supply chain management, lean manufacturing, process optimization, all the stuff Dad claimed I'd never understand because I was too soft for real business. Funny thing about being written off by everyone you know, it gives you plenty of motivation to prove them wrong. Every weekend, I'd sit in my cramped studio apartment with textbooks spread across my kitchen table, learning about things I'd seen firsthand but never really understood. Inventory turnover ratios, just-in-time delivery systems, cost reduction methodologies. The weird part is, I was actually good at it, but here's where it gets interesting. Working at the warehouse wasn't just paying my bills, it was like getting a master's degree in everything my family's company was doing wrong. I watched our night supervisor track every single package, every delay, every damaged shipment. These guys had metrics for everything. Meanwhile, I remembered how our family business ran on gut feelings, and that's how we've always done it. I started keeping a notebook. Nothing fancy, just observations about waste I was seeing everywhere. Like how we'd package small items in boxes 3 times too big, then pay extra shipping because of dimensional weight. Or how we'd order materials in quantities that made no sense just because someone got a good deal from a supplier. Then there's the coffee meeting that changed everything. Remember how I mentioned tracking who actually held power versus titles? One of those names was Marcus Rivera, a supplier who'd worked with our company for 15 years before Dad cut ties with him over some pricing dispute. I reached out to him through LinkedIn, expecting maybe some gossip about how badly things were going. What I got instead was a business education I couldn't have bought anywhere. Marcus met me at this little diner downtown, and for 3 hours straight, he walked me through margin analysis like I was his star pupil. He showed me invoices, cost breakdowns, profit calculations, stuff that would have taken me years to figure out on my own. Your family's problem, he said, stirring sugar into his 4th cup of coffee, isn't that they don't know the business, it's that they think knowing the business means you don't need to understand the numbers. That hit different. All those years watching Dad make decisions based on relationships and handshake deals, I'd assumed that was just how successful people operated. But Marcus was showing me spreadsheets that told a completely different story. Our margins were thin, our processes were inefficient, our customer retention was dropping year over year, so I did something that probably sounds crazy. I wrote a business plan, not for some pie-in-the-sky startup, but for fixing the exact problems I was seeing at our family company. I called it a lean operational pilot program, which sounds way fancier than it actually was. The plan was simple. Identify the biggest waste areas, implement basic tracking systems, and focus on 3 metrics that actually mattered: cost per unit, on-time delivery, and customer satisfaction scores. I even worked out the math for how much money could be saved in the first 90 days. But why would I spend my free time solving problems for people who'd basically erased me from their lives? Good question. Maybe it was spite. Maybe it was hope. Or maybe I just needed to prove to myself that getting cut off wasn't the end of my story. It was the beginning of figuring out who I actually was when nobody else was watching. Little did I know that all those late nights with textbooks and spreadsheets were about to pay off in ways I never expected, because sometimes the phone rings at the exact moment you're ready to answer it. You know what's funny about hitting rock bottom? Sometimes the phone still rings. 3 weeks into my warehouse gig, lifting boxes until my back screamed, I got this call around midnight. My old Nokia was buzzing on the break room table while I was scarfing down a gas station sandwich. The number looked familiar, but I couldn't place it right away. Hey, is this really you? The voice belonged to Marcus Chen, operations manager at Coastal Distribution. We'd worked together on a few contracts back when I had an office and business cards that actually mattered. Man, I heard what happened with your family's company. That's rough. Here's the thing about getting kicked out of your own legacy. Word travels fast in small industries. Everyone knew the Hendersons had drama brewing, and everyone had opinions about who deserved what. Marcus wasn't calling to gossip, though. He had a problem, and apparently I was his Hail Mary. We're drowning over here, he said, and I could hear the exhaustion in his voice. 3 trucks broke down this week. Drivers are quitting left and right, and we've got a pharmaceutical client threatening to drop us if we miss one more delivery window. My boss is talking about shutting down the whole division. Makes sense, right? When you're desperate, you call the guy who used to fix impossible logistics puzzles for breakfast. even if that guy currently smells like cardboard dust and hasn't slept more than 4 hours straight in weeks. The weird part is, I almost said no. Pride does funny things to your brain when you're running on fumes and instant coffee. Part of me wanted to tell Marcus that Henderson Solutions cost premium rates. Thank you very much, and maybe he should try the Yellow Pages instead. But then I remembered my rent was due in 6 days, and warehouse shifts don't exactly cover upscale apartment living. Plus, honestly, I missed the rush of solving real problems. Moving boxes from point A to point B gets old fast when you used to orchestrate supply chains that fed half the region. Give me the details, I said, grabbing a napkin to scribble notes. The situation was worse than Marcus had let on initially. Coastal had committed to delivering medical supplies to 14 facilities across 3 states, but their fleet was basically held together with duct tape and prayer. Their dispatch system was stuck in the 1990s, running on spreadsheets and gut instincts. Half their drivers were new hires who didn't know the routes, and the other half were burned-out veterans ready to walk. Well, I've seen worse. Actually, that's a lie. I hadn't seen worse, but I definitely imagined scenarios this messy during my late-night strategy sessions at the family company. The difference was, back then I had resources, staff, and a budget that didn't require checking my bank balance twice. This time, I had $300 in checking, a pickup truck I'd bought off Craigslist, and absolutely nothing left to lose. I can fix this, I told Marcus, but I need 2 things. Complete access to your routing data, and you pay me based on results, not hours. That's when things got interesting. I spent the next 48 hours living on energy drinks and stubbornness, mapping every delivery route like I was planning a military operation. Called up 6 guys from my warehouse job who had commercial licenses and clean driving records. Promised them double their hourly rate if they could handle weekend shifts and follow GPS instructions without asking questions. Then there's the part where I basically turned my apartment into mission control. Remember, I didn't have fancy logistics software anymore, just my laptop, Google Maps, and a whiteboard I'd stolen from the warehouse break room. My neighbors probably thought I'd lost my mind, standing there at 3 in the morning drawing delivery routes with different colored markers. But here's what my uncle never understood about operations. It's not about having the fanciest tools. It's about seeing patterns where other people see chaos, and being willing to work harder than everyone else thinks is reasonable. By Monday morning, we had 12 rental trucks on the road with drivers who actually showed up. I'd negotiated same-day truck rentals using Coastal's credit, reorganized their routes to cut drive time by 30%, and set up a tracking system using nothing but text messages and shared spreadsheets. 98% on-time delivery. 2 weeks straight. Marcus's boss was so impressed he asked if I could stick around for a 90-day trial. Below market rate, sure, but with performance bonuses that actually meant something. And suddenly, other companies were asking questions about the guy who'd pulled off the Coastal turnaround. Makes you wonder what else might be possible when you stop waiting for permission to prove what you're worth. I thought I was done watching their mess from the outside. Wrong. The universe has this twisted sense of humor, where it makes you witness the exact train wreck you predicted, just when you're finally building something of your own. 3 months after they cut me loose, the news hit like a slow-motion car crash. I couldn't stop staring at. The morning headline made my coffee taste bitter. Local family firm loses multi-million city contract. Our company, well, their company now, had blown the biggest municipal deal we'd ever landed. The same contract I'd helped write the proposal for before they decided I wasn't family material anymore. The reporter quoted some city official saying delivery failures and communication breakdowns led to the termination. I almost choked laughing. Communication breakdowns? That's corporate speak for nobody knew what the hell they were doing. But here's the thing that really got me. I felt this weird mix of vindication and guilt, like watching your ex crash their car right after they dumped you. You want to feel satisfied, but there's this nagging voice saying you could have prevented it. Stupid, right? They made their choice. I was just collateral damage in their brilliant family restructuring plan. The employee reviews started leaking online a week later. Glassdoor became my guilty pleasure scroll. Management doesn't communicate with each other, wrote someone in logistics. Another gem, 3 different bosses gave me 3 different priorities this week. Chaos doesn't begin to describe this place. The ratings dropped to 2.3 stars. When I worked there, we were sitting pretty at 4.1. Makes sense, right? Then my old buddy Jake from accounting called me up. We'd grab beers occasionally, nothing major, but he was always straight with me. "Dude, you need to know what's happening here," he said, voice all hushed like he was calling from a bunker. Turns out the company was hemorrhaging people faster than a punctured tire loses air. The warehouse supervisor quit without notice. Two of our best drivers jumped ship to competitors. Even Margaret from HR. Margaret, who'd been there since dinosaurs roamed the earth, put in her 2 weeks. Jake told me vendors were getting antsy about payments. "We're running 60, sometimes 90 days behind on invoices," he whispered. "Your uncle keeps saying cash flow is temporarily tight, but I've seen the numbers. This isn't temporary anything." The same uncle who'd read me that letter about family responsibility was apparently playing Russian roulette with supplier relationships. Classic. Well, then there was the production nightmare. Remember how I mentioned I'd been tracking unit costs and waste? Turns out my cousin, the golden child who inherited my spot, had this brilliant idea to redesign our packaging. Completely redesigned it without consulting anyone who actually, packages things for a living. The new design looked pretty in PowerPoint presentations, but took 40% longer to assemble and used materials that cost twice as much. The plant was running mandatory overtime just to hit half their weekly quotas. And the weird part is, nobody seemed to connect these dots. Every problem was treated like some isolated incident. Instead of symptoms of the same disease, they'd ripped out the operational backbone without understanding what it actually did. I wasn't perfect, don't get me wrong, but I knew which levers moved what. I understood the weird dance between production schedules and delivery windows. They'd replaced institutional knowledge with good intentions and family loyalty. The breaking point came when I bumped into Tom Fletcher at the grocery store. Tom had been our biggest independent client for 8 years. "Sorry to hear about you and the family business," he said, shaking his head. "Wish you were still there to sort out this mess we're dealing with." Apparently, they'd missed 3 delivery windows in 2 months. Tom was looking at other suppliers. "Nothing personal," he said, "but my customers don't care about your family drama." I stood there in the cereal aisle, holding a box of cornflakes, watching 8 years of relationship building crumble because nobody thought operational consistency mattered. The beautiful irony: they'd cut me to protect family interests, but their family interests were bleeding out through every crack I used to patch. That night, I couldn't sleep. Not because I was devastated. Honestly, part of me felt weirdly relieved that I wasn't responsible for fixing their cascading disasters. But because I kept thinking about all those employees who'd done nothing wrong except trust that leadership knew what they were doing. People like Margaret and Jake and the warehouse crew who were just trying to do good work inside a system that was falling apart. I had no idea that someone else was watching this train wreck too, someone with enough power to do something about it and enough sense to know they needed help fast. Well, the bank's invitation shouldn't have surprised me as much as it did. After all, they'd been watching our family company bleed money for months while I was out there proving what I could actually do. But sitting in that conference room, staring at faces I'd never seen before, felt like walking into an exam I hadn't studied for. The lender, some guy named Marcus, who looked like he'd rather be playing golf, slid a folder across the table. "Your family's business is 30 days from covenant breach," he said, not even bothering with small talk. "We need solutions, not excuses." That's when it hit me. They weren't asking me here to chat about the weather or catch up on family drama. These people had done their homework. They knew about my warehouse job, my certification, the clients I'd been helping on the side. Makes sense, right? Banks don't mess around when loans go bad. I opened my laptop, the same beat-up thing I'd been using to run numbers at 2 a.m. after 12-hour shifts. The presentation I'd thrown together looked pathetic compared to the fancy charts my cousin probably used in his pet project meetings. But the numbers? The numbers were solid. 12 weeks, I started, my voice steadier than I felt. That's all I need to turn cash flow positive and get service levels back above contract minimums. Marcus raised an eyebrow. The other suits, I counted 5 of them, leaned forward like sharks smelling blood in the water. Then there's the part where I had to explain just how bad things had gotten. Inventory sitting for 90 days because nobody wanted to make tough SKU decisions. Freight costs through the roof because my cousin thought negotiating with carriers was beneath him. Customer complaints piling up while the family argued about who should handle what. The weird part is, laying it all out felt liberating. For months, I'd been watching from the outside, knowing exactly what needed fixing, but having zero power to do anything about it. Now these strangers were hanging on every word, taking notes, asking the right questions. Department by department, I continued, clicking through slides that showed benchmark comparisons. We cut the product lines losing money 3 quarters straight. We consolidate shipping lanes for bulk savings. We implement daily production meetings instead of this once-a-week disaster check nonsense they've got now. Marcus interrupted. What about resistance from existing management? Existing management. That's corporate speak for my uncle and cousin, the same people who'd kicked me out 8 months ago for supposedly not being ready. Well, they'd had their chance to prove leadership was about more than just having the right last name. Resistance won't matter when the alternative is bankruptcy, I said, probably sounding harsher than I intended. But honestly, I was tired of pretending family politics mattered more than keeping 200 people employed. Let's not forget the best part of this whole meeting. While I'm breaking down exactly how to save their investment, my phone keeps buzzing with texts from Mom. Apparently, word had gotten back that I was meeting with the bank. The family was concerned about what I might be telling them. Concerned after cutting me off without a backup plan, after letting the business slide while I was out there learning what actual work looked like. The questions kept coming for another hour: cash projections, timeline milestones, staffing changes, vendor negotiations. Everything I'd been thinking about during those long nights in the warehouse, watching forklifts move products more efficiently than our family company had managed in years. But why did they really want me back? Marcus made it clear when he pulled out the loan documents. Covenant breach triggers immediate review of management structure. The board has options. Options. Another fancy way of saying my family's control wasn't as absolute as they'd always pretended. Turns out, when you owe enough money, banks get a say in who runs things. The room went quiet when I finished my presentation. 5 suits staring at spreadsheets that showed exactly how much money they could save, how fast we could turn things around, what it would take to get back above water. Marcus closed his folder. We need an answer by Friday. Full operational authority, interim COO position, 90-day performance metrics. My hands were shaking as I packed up my laptop. 8 months ago, they'd said I wasn't ready for leadership. Now the bank was offering me more power than I'd ever had in the family business. Friday was 3 days away. 3 days for my family to decide whether keeping me out was worth losing everything they'd built. The irony wasn't lost on me. They'd have to choose between their pride and their survival. Walking out of that building, I couldn't shake the feeling that whatever happened next would change everything permanently. I won't lie, walking back into that building felt like swallowing glass mixed with victory. The same hallways where I'd been escorted out 6 months earlier now buzzed with whispers about the prodigal son's return. Except this time, I wasn't the screw-up nephew getting a handout. I was the guy with the plan that could save their asses. The first thing I did was pull every SKU report from the past year. You know what I found? We were manufacturing 847 different product variations. That's not diversity, that's insanity. Nearly 200 of those items hadn't sold more than 50 units in 3 quarters. We were basically running a museum of products nobody wanted, complete with the storage costs and expired inventory to prove it. I called an all-hands meeting that Monday morning. The conference room hadn't seen that many people since the Christmas party where Uncle got drunk and told everyone about his vision for expansion. This time, though, I came with spreadsheets instead of speeches. We're cutting everything that's been bleeding money for 90 days or more, I announced. The silence was deafening. Then the plant manager raised his hand like we were in grade school. But what if customers come back for those items? Here's the thing about fear. It makes you hold on to garbage because you're terrified of missing out on something that probably isn't coming anyway. I showed them the numbers. Those dead SKUs were costing us warehouse space, production setup time, and inventory carrying costs that added up to more than their total annual revenue. Sometimes the best decision is admitting you made a mistake and cutting your losses. Next came the freight negotiations. Our logistics manager had been using the same 3 carriers for 15 years because they know our business. Translation, they'd gotten comfortable overcharging us because we never pushed back. I spent 2 weeks mapping our shipping lanes and discovered we had trucks going to the same regions on different days, half empty. The math was embarrassing. We were paying premium rates for the convenience of never having to think strategically about our routes. I brought in 4 new carriers and played them against each other like a poker game. Not in a sleazy way, but with real data about our volumes and consistency. The result? A 3% freight reduction that saved us nearly $40,000 in the first quarter alone. The old logistics manager looked at me like I'd performed magic. Really, I'd just done what he should have been doing all along, treating our shipping costs like they mattered. But the real magic happened on the factory floor. For months, maybe years, problems had been piling up like dirty laundry nobody wanted to deal with. Machine downtime that just happened sometimes. Quality issues that got fixed after the customer complained. Scheduling conflicts that turned every rush order into a crisis. The workers knew exactly what was wrong, they just didn't have anyone listening who could actually do something about it. I started daily stand-up meetings. 15 minutes every morning where anyone could raise issues without getting lectured about staying positive or working harder. The first week was brutal, complaint after complaint about broken processes, missing tools, and communication breakdowns that had been festering for months. By week 3, though, something shifted. People started bringing solutions instead of just problems. Defects dropped 22% in the first month because workers finally felt safe pointing out issues before they became disasters. Then there's the retention problem we'd been ignoring. Our turnover rate was sitting at 38%, which meant we were constantly training new people who would leave just as they got good at their jobs. Exit interviews mentioned the same things over and over: no clear path for advancement, pay that didn't reward skill development, and the feeling that management saw workers as replaceable parts instead of people with brains. We implemented pay-for-skill ladders within 6 weeks. Learn a new process, get a raise. Cross-train on multiple stations, unlock another bump. Suddenly, people started volunteering for training sessions they used to avoid. Our quit rate dropped below industry average for the first time in 3 years. Funny how treating people like they have potential becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy. The customer satisfaction scores started climbing in month 2. When you're not constantly scrambling to fix problems, you can actually focus on delivering what you promised when you promised it. Novel concept, right? Our biggest client, the one who'd been threatening to find a new supplier, renewed their contract early and bumped up their volume commitment. Uncle watched all this happen with the expression of someone who couldn't decide whether to be proud or resentful. Progress has a way of making yesterday's leadership look questionable, and nobody likes feeling replaceable. But the numbers don't lie, and the bank was starting to smile again during our monthly check-ins. The momentum was building, but momentum is just potential energy waiting to be converted into something permanent. What happened next would determine whether this turnaround was real or just another temporary fix. The paperwork felt heavier than it should have. Dad's hands shook slightly as he signed the share transfer documents. And honestly, part of me wanted to grab his wrist and tell him to stop, but I didn't. 3 months of fixing their mess had earned me this moment, and I wasn't about to let sentiment screw it up. The board resolution had passed 6-2 the week before. Uncle voted against it, naturally, called it rewarding insubordination, like I was some teenager who'd stolen the car keys, instead of the guy who'd just saved their company from bankruptcy. Mom abstained, which hurt more than if she'd voted no. At least voting no would have shown she cared enough to take a stand. Well, the lender-backed management package made the whole thing possible anyway. Banks love operational turnarounds with documented results, and my numbers spoke louder than family politics. 22% reduction in defects, 3% freight savings, customer satisfaction back above contract thresholds. The metrics didn't lie, even if everyone else had been lying to themselves for years. I bought out the remaining shares over lunch at that same diner where I used to grab coffee before warehouse shifts. Funny how circles close sometimes. The lawyers had structured everything so cleanly that signing felt almost anticlimactic. No dramatic speeches or family confrontations. Just signatures, handshakes, and suddenly I owned the thing they'd kicked me out of 8 months earlier. The succession plan came next, and this time we did it right. Real documentation, clear roles and responsibilities, performance metrics tied to decision-making authority. None of this will figure it out as we go. Nonsense that had nearly killed us. Makes sense, right? You wouldn't run a factory floor without standard operating procedures, but somehow family businesses think they can wing leadership transitions. Let's not forget the people who'd actually kept things running while management played politics. Reinstating health benefits felt better than signing any ownership document. The profit-sharing program was my idea too, because why shouldn't the warehouse guys who'd worked overtime to fix our delivery problems get a piece of the upside? Sarah from accounting actually cried when I announced it. Said she'd been rationing her insulin because the old insurance had those ridiculous deductibles. That hit me harder than I expected. While I was feeling sorry for myself about family drama, she was literally choosing between medication and groceries. The weird part is how normal everything felt once the paperwork cleared. I'd been expecting some kind of emotional breakthrough or closure moment, but Wednesday felt like Wednesday. Same coffee machine that made terrible coffee. Same morning production meetings. Same problems that needed solving, just with different people solving them now. Uncle cleaned out his office on a Thursday. Didn't say goodbye to anyone, just packed his plaques and golf photos into bankers' boxes and left through the back entrance. Dad told me later that he'd called the whole thing a hostile takeover by an ungrateful kid, which would have stung more if his pet project hadn't burned through 200 grand with zero customers to show for it. But why dwell on bitter old men when there was actual work to do? The factory gate project became my obsession. I'd been thinking about it since those first nights in the warehouse, watching people clock in without anyone acknowledging they existed beyond their badge numbers. The new sign took 3 weeks to design and install, big enough that drivers could read it from the street, listing every single employee by name. Warehouse workers, office staff, maintenance crew, everyone. The installation crew thought I was crazy for wanting something that elaborate, but they didn't understand what it meant. Maria from the loading dock brought her kids to see their mom's name up there. Jimmy, our longest tenured forklift operator, took a selfie and posted it everywhere. Small gestures matter more than people think, especially when you've spent years being treated like interchangeable parts. Then there is the question everyone keeps asking, was it worth it? 8 months of proving myself, fighting for every small victory, watching my own family choose sides against me. The honest answer changes depending on what day you ask me. Most days, yeah. I walk through that factory floor and see people who believe in what we're building again. Our on-time delivery rate hit 98.5% last month. We're profitable, growing, and the bank covenants aren't keeping anyone awake at night anymore. Some days, though, I catch myself wondering what might have happened if they just listened from the beginning. If Uncle had swallowed his pride, if Dad had backed me up during that first meeting, if Mom had voted instead of sitting on the fence. Well, here's what I learned about wondering. It doesn't change anything. What changes things is showing up, doing the work, and proving you belong there. Whether they wanted me there or not became irrelevant the moment I made myself indispensable. But success brings new problems nobody warns you about.